kaikki täällä. Hanna, mun pitää tehdä joku adressi ihan tähän. Täällä on vaan semmoinen, joka saa maksaa. Kun unohdan jotain, niin sitten sä vaan lisät. Joo, hyvää iltapäivää. Guten Nachmittag. Nice afternoon, a good afternoon. I very warmly welcome you to the closing session of our debates on Europe, which sees its third day of engaged discussions and very nice personal encounters. My name is Mikko Fritze and I work for the Finland-Institut. The Finland-Institut deals with cultural exchange and scientific exchange in the German-speaking part of Europe. And we are kind of drawing the mind map that we were talking about this day, so maybe it's important what we do, I hope so. And I really feel honored, of course, but mainly happy that I could be co-organizing this event. So thank you for the good cooperation to my cooperation mates. And during the Helsinki conference in this very building, Dictator Ceausescu from Romania had the longest speech. He spoke 35 minutes, and me being the youngest of 4 brothers, I'm very competitive. I tried to make it a little bit longer, of course, so you know what you have to prepare for. And I was 11 years old when the Helsinki conference took place. I then lived in Finland. And even as a kid, I felt that there was a huge excitement around me. I didn't know what it was, but the adult world was completely, or seemed completely electrified. And there's only one other event in my memory, I think it's about the same time, which I remember the adult world being so accelerated, and it was when the world-famous erotic film Emmanuel came into Finnish movie theaters, and even my parents assisted it. So those 2 memories I have. And in both cases, something, of course, very big was going on. And on the first day, we saw the documentary film Helsinki Effect by Arthur Frank. And what a perfect entry to these debates, I have to say. And for those who have not seen the film, I strongly recommend so, and it's going to be shown in many broadcasting companies around Europe, and I don't know where else. It's really worth it. And what remained in my head from that is that now when we talk about the Helsinki conference, I have all the pictures. I see Gorbachev, Brezhnev, Honecker, Schmidt, Genscher, Gromyko, and it's nice. It's kind of illustrated when we talk about it. But what remained especially is the understanding of how much time and how much hard work important democratic decisions may need, and what a bore this kind of process can be. And then, how long can it take till these decisions really take effect? So in a way that gave me hope, because the other day, last Tuesday, I had to moderate an event in the European Parliament in Brussels. And honestly, how painfully boring is the political Brussels. What a drag to see and hear the delegates read their speeches, as I do, with monotonous voices from papers in front of them and not even lifting their eyes. German and Finnish parliament might not be biggest fun, but I think they're, compared to the European Parliament, they're Broadway, so definitely. But now, after having seen Frank's film, I think, you never know. Maybe those people in Brussels all work hard and are about to build our bright, democratic European future under a protective shield of boreness. You'd never know, or boredom. And when I was in the European Parliament the last time before this Tuesday, and people who know me expect me to take this step now, or I won't be surprised. So the last time I was there was 2017, and we drove up to the entrance of the very European Parliament with a fire truck in which we had built a sauna, of course. That was quite successful and gained a lot of attention, and we discussed in bathrobes and swimming suits with the European parliaments about the European future and offered a public sauna to everybody who wanted, right in the political heart of Europe. And we called the event Sweating for Europe. And maybe that's a motto for all of us. The question of the following panel is, what now? And basically it's the third thing I took from that film, is at the end, it is we, the people, who make the change. So I'd say, let's not give up. Let's all work hard and fight hard for a Europe worth living, and let us be sweating for Europe. And with that said, I will shortly introduce our moderator, Hanna Smith. She is the Senior Strategic Advisor to the Secretary General of the OSCE and visiting professor at the College of Europe. So I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon for everybody. Very, very nice to see you all here on a sunny Saturday afternoon in Helsinki. I think outside also waits something interesting, but hopefully we can compete quite a bit here with this panel. I'm very honored and pleased to be here today, and I actually congratulate all those organizers and supporters of this event. I go to a lot of different types of events, debates, planning sessions, and something that is not always present. And I think in this and here in this event, it has been all kind of voices, so to speak. OSCE is, of course, known for the approach of the comprehensive security, which means that there has to be the civil society, the political, the military, and the private sector, one could almost say, present to get the comprehensive view for the security. There has been a lot of different types of conversations going on, and our panel's job now is to little bit look at what after the final act, what now? A new world order for Europe and possibly for the world. But to get there, I think first we need to have a little bit of situational awareness, so to speak. Where are we now? Everything that has been said, and also referring back to the film, for example, everything starts from the fact that you start mapping the situation. How do you interpret it, where we are? What are the problems? Where are the threats? Who are friends? Who are enemies? That type of a picture is actually quite needed. And that's where this panel will start as well. We have 4 excellent speakers here, again, representing from quite kind of different views, a little bit of different geographical locations. And only that way we can, in fact, get the comprehensive picture and possibly build comprehensive security. So what we are going to start with is that I am going to present a question to the panelists, and we'll start from there. And the question here is, clearly, this thing. How do you view today's situation? How would you describe the security situation, the situation in Europe from your perspective? And we start first with Toni Sandell, who's the Deputy Director for the Finnish Task Force for the chair year of the OSCE. Toni.
Thank you, Hanna. Perhaps I will start painting quite a gloomy picture and hope to get happier while we progress, hopefully, towards solutions. For the European security, the situation seems to be that there's one participating state, as we would say in the OSCE, that wants to break the status quo, the existing status quo based on the Helsinki Final Act and international law, UN Charter, Paris Charter, etc. That has caused immense suffering in Ukraine. It's causing new rearmament in Europe. So that is a big thing. Second thing that I would take in the name of the comprehensive security is the situation of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. So there's a need to have a very close watch to domestic politics inside the European countries, to guarantee, to make sure that they comply with the standards that are put to them. That goes to elections. There's a need to guarantee that the elections are free, transparent, fair. And that goes to the security situation because domestic policy is connected to the external aggression, which we have witnessed with Russia. Then the third issue I have to say, maybe because it's not spoken so much, is the triple planetary crisis that we are living at. The climate change, the pollution, and biodiversity loss are the major threats, not only in Europe but globally, that humankind needs to face, and that's with multilateralism for sure.
Thank you very much. You presented us now several, like you said, started with the gloomy things. What's the thing that worries you most?
In the immediate, it's the European security to counter the Russian intentions. And in the less immediate, it's the other two.
Okay, yeah. That's how it, I suppose, goes. Okay, so we move on now. Next is Veton Surroi, who is a Kosovan politician, newspaper publisher, and public intellectual. So how do you see the situation in Europe today?
A bit more bleaker. Thank you very much. Thank you, Karl Henrik, for having me here and the whole team. Let me make 4 provocative points, if I may, to answer your question. The first one is we are in the Helsinki period. Helsinki is Yalta and Helsinki put together and compressed. And that means that we are in the age in which the new spheres of influence are being established, with the hope that at some stage there will be a legitimization of that new arrangement. Now, between Yalta and Helsinki, we had 30 years. We don't know how many years will go on, but we are at the stage in which the spheres of influence are established. The second point is that our identity and our collective security is being done by 2 forces that do not necessarily correspond to each other, but in our case, they are actors that are moving in that direction. And that's Mr. Trump's decision, which is not only Mr. Trump's, but it is a historical process in which the United States is saying Europe has to pay for its own security and cannot rely on our umbrella anymore. And Mr. Putin, who says, well, I want to make sure that I have a say in European security, and I'll do it the hard way. The third point is that we are still living in our own minds in Eurocentrism, in thinking that our problems are the biggest problems. And this is nothing new. This has happened before. In Rwanda, there was a genocide, but then only when things started happening that nasty way in Bosnia did our minds go in that direction. And the same is now with Ukraine. We feel that this is the highest, and of course for the Ukrainian people and for many of us Europeans it is. But at the same time, we lose sight that in this very big transformative moment, there are things happening which are re-evaluating our whole value system. In Gaza, in November of 2023, more children were killed in Gaza in only November of 2023 than throughout the Ukrainian war, throughout the Bosnian war, throughout the Kosovo war. But these are not white-skinned people who correspond to this culture, and therefore this is something that has to be raised as a question of the value system that we will deal with in the future.
Great. Very interesting, several points, and I can't almost choose now which one of my questions I would put to you kind of first, but perhaps I'll take the kind of your last point, this Eurocentrism issue. How do you see it, this thing that, because each region is worried about its own security.
Yeah.
So this interlinkage that you mentioned now, the Gaza, then we have a Ukraine in Europe, there are several other issues in Africa and so on. So how should we deal perhaps this Eurocentrism and where are the linkages?
Well, there are three elements to it. The first one is to be aware that the outcome of whatever we have entered is a multipolar world, and that it's not going to be a West versus the rest type of world. And that means Europe needs to have a shared security. And that means Europe needs to have a shared value system in that competitive multipolar world. And that basically means that we have to understand that our crises are interlinked and are part of whatever is going to happen in the future. And therefore, the outcome needs to be a shared European security system that includes places that have unfinished conflicts like the Western Balkans, and a shared value system that projects that genocides are not permissible, not in the European continent, not in any other continent, and that Europe has a voice on it.
Great, thank you. Okay.
May I just interrupt you? If you could, Veton, push up your mic a little bit.
I don't know where the mic is. Oh, okay. It fell?
Now you need to put it onto your ears.
Oh, okay. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. So that was a technical break.
I can repeat it again if you want.
Yeah. Yeah. So after a short technical break, we continue. And we go in the order now everybody is sitting here. So next we have Nataliya Gumenyuk, who's a Ukrainian journalist and the CEO of the Public Interest Journalism Lab. All very interesting. Nataliya, what is your assessment of the security situation in Europe and perhaps the world we're living in now?
In short term, it's definitely better than half a year ago, because I think Europe is awakening and kind of treating its security more seriously than it had used to do even like a year ago. We know the reasons. But as a journalist working in the field, I probably would be very practical, and the Russian aggression against Ukraine, it's kind of a good example. So I was always in a quite good I was quite always hopeful about the work of the OSCE in Ukraine. And I was in Mariupol on September 5th when the Minsk agreement was negotiated. And I've met the first Ukrainian soldiers coming from the battlefield for that one day when there was ceasefire since then. I think it lasted for one day or so. In any way, till 2022, there were not a lot of us who kind of supported the Minsk process, at least thinking maybe it's better than nothing. But unfortunately, that was used as a trap, and we treated, the repressions, the political persecution in occupied Russian areas in this framework of human rights, in the Helsinki mind, Helsinki Act mind. While Russia was building bridges, was developing the whole infrastructure to wage the full-scale war, and now we agree that it was a trap. And with a very simple also another example that on the February 24th, the OSCE resumed its operation, special monitoring mission in Ukraine, and kind of evacuated its own stuff. It was exactly in the moment when I believe it was exactly when they were needed to be there and the eyes should be on the ground. But one paradox, while we're speaking and following, the question of the debate, 3 months later, 3 Ukrainian nationalists, the staff employees of Special Monitoring Mission of OSCE from occupied areas, Luhansk and Donetsk region, their name is Maxim Petrov, Dmitro Shabanov, and Vadim Holod, had been detained, accused to be spies. Then they were sentenced for 14 years, and now they are in Russian prisons in Siberia for 3 years. They have all the immunity, everything, And for me, there is a question. Of course, there were the concerns of the leadership of the OSCE, of the UN Committee for Human Rights, but, the stuff is still in Siberia. So for me, the question is extremely, practical. Before we start to speak big about security, we can discuss, we can understand. For instance, we learned as Ukrainians, you really can defend itself with armed forces. The atrocities stopped to be committed in Izum, in Bucha, in Kherson, because there was a Ukrainian army retaking the cities. There was nothing else. So it's tempting to be a bit disillusioned with international war. I'm international rule, order and the international rule of law, security architecture. I'm still a bit of the optimist, and I'll develop this thought. But I think, again, before we're thinking about something big, I do think whether at least the institutions we speak about security can protect their own stuff. Or, for instance, is the organization capable to bring 3 employees from Siberia? Is it like a task? If this task is doable, then probably things are okay. If this is already the task which is totally non-achievable, then probably it's a bit too early to think something else can be done.
Okay, well, that was an interesting angle. And I do subscribe to the fact that, if we are not looking at the details that are happening in a bigger picture, and that would be one, then I suppose we are not always getting everything exactly in place. And your argument, if I understood it correctly, is in the way that, if we cannot fix details, how can we fix the bigger picture? So, but at the same time, you were positive on the situation. So where do you see do you see any other, when you said that this is a better situation because Europe has kind of woken up now, do you see any other signs for kind of a positive development?
Yes, because first of all, I think why the details are so pivotal. If we would now even discuss any type of the ceasefire and any type of the observatory mission, can we exclude this type of details? Because in the end, it would be about a personnel who need to work there. So I think before it's resolved, can we at all get engaged into the larger discussion? But I think why I'm not just positive. Of course, it's a bad time because what I also say, we idealists, we always were, as a journalist, independent, intellectuals were always speaking against hypocrisy, in these international institutions. They are not doing enough, they create an illusion of actions while not acting. But at this time, I believe maybe it's better to stick to hypocrisy rather than bluntly, promote what is promoted now. Because, Putin is bragging about war crimes. Now we have the leaders who speak about the deportation of the Palestinians. So maybe better you hide, those intentions and at least stick to some of the rules. So I really insist that we're fighting not a particular kind of evil ideology, but the cynicism that nothing is possible. And quoting a different, Ukrainian with whom I talked, it was a former police chief of Mariupol who spent 123 days in Russian detention, tortured. And he literally said, if at least 10% of Geneva Conventions were implemented, I'll be a happy man. Which means that it's very bad, but he thinks that they are okay. They need to be implemented. So I think we need to stick to that, and we still understand that the void is bad. It's a bad moment. The destruction of the US aid showed that it's impossible to, we cannot imagine to build a different US aid somewhere. We're speaking about dismantling of the things. So I think we still can stick instead of dismantling to the just creating the cases where things are done rather than we discuss whether they are relevant.
Okay, we'll get back to that when we discuss a little bit what should be done. But I think the devil is in the detail as one of the things that seems to be holding here. Now we move on to our next panelist. Karl Schlögel, sorry, I forgot my glasses, German historian and public intellectual. Now, I would be very interested of hearing your assessment of what kind of Europe we are living in currently.
Yeah. We are living in a Europe in war and pre-war time. And the question was where we are now. I would answer very simply. In this moment, I'm in Helsinki. I'm in this beautiful building of Alvar Aalto. I feel the burden of the prestige of the Helsinki Final Act, the historical document, and the burden of the lieu de mémoire here. But in the lunch break, I went around and I visited the library, I visited the Parliament House, I visited the Philharmonia, etc. And I thought, what a beautiful place is Helsinki in this new Central Park area. It's unbelievable. This is Europe if Finlandization would be this kind of progress, I would support entirely the notion of Finlandization. But I have to tell you that I never have been an enthusiast of Finlandization. As somebody who came first time in the 60s to Prague, to the Spring of Prague, to the Soviet Union, and I perceived Helsinki, the conference in Helsinki, the shadow of the occupation of Prague in '68. I perceived it from the perspective of my fellows, friends, comrades from the Soviet dissident movement. Of course, I know that, and I got to know these people from the Helsinki committees in Moscow, Vilnius, Kiev, and others, and I know the impact of this conference had for the civil rights movement, for the dissident movement. But I think there's a great ambivalence that it is in a certain way the end of Cold War, yes, but in another respect, it was the consolidation of the post-Yalta order in Europe. So what now is going on, I mean, from an older generation. I have to say I had 3 great ruptures in my lifetime, in short lifetime. This is 68, and I mean 68 in West Berlin, in Prague, and in Moscow. The 60s existed also on the other side. It was a great time to go beyond the Iron Curtain, to move around and to see that there's a great world to discover for our generation. The second was 89, when the wall came down around the corner in my Berlin apartment. And so I have 2 great events in my personal life. But the third one is Crimea 2014. And I was in the so-called Russian Spring in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kharkiv, and other places. And I never could imagine that this time would come back. And so I had the feeling that the generation I belong to is challenged to go back to fight. And the question is how. And I have to say I feel great problems to articulate and to find the proper language and words for what is going on. I mean, the short formula is war, pre-war, and that Europe has to defend herself, and but we don't know what will happen tomorrow. Only prophets and Cassandra know what is happening, happy end or apocalypse. I don't know. Your question is where we are. We are in the center of turmoil, and we don't have an overlook how it will end. So everything is possible, the self-invention of Europe, but it could be also the failing of Europe. And the last word, 10 years ago, the first debate on Europe, where I took part in Bucharest, the subtitle of the debate of Europe, what will happen if Europe fails? That was 10 years ago. So we are dealing with these questions since quite a long time.
Thank you very much. Since you are a historian and you took now the historical reference on these things, do you think that history repeats itself? Or do we have a chance to move forward as such? Or are we kind of in these cycles of crises, war, then have to negotiate the peace, little bit peaceful time, status quo, and then again we getting back to the same cycle?
No, I'm not a determinist or fatalist. I do not believe in repeating history, but I'm quite sure that we can not learn, but we can take lessons, we can study the past and get information how the historical process was going on, etc. We can learn a lot, but the situation, any situation, is entirely new. And the question I have is, how can we come to terms with an entirely new situation? Beyond analogies, beyond lessons of history, we have to find our own image or prospect. And this is very interesting to go into history. I mean, I'm dealing in the last time, I'm a historian of Russia and Soviet Union mainly, and since 10 years also of Ukraine. But I was very interested how our exile people, Horkheimer, Adorno, and Krakauer, etc., what could they do as intellectuals, sociologists, scientists, what could they do and contribute to analyze and to fight against fascism. And this is a very interesting lesson, how to learn, how to come to terms, how to find a language. And the last sentence, we have not, this is my conviction, we have not found the vocabulary, the notions, the categories for defining what is going on. And I have in mind especially Putinism and Trumpism as new phenomenons.
Very interesting, and we'll definitely, actually the next round, you can continue a little bit that thought, because when you said this new situation, not to find the analogs necessarily, but to find the solutions for the situation that we have. Next round, I'm going to ask you about the solutions. You described now the situation in Europe, quite bleak, a little bit hope. Devil is in the details. History not necessarily repeating itself, but we have definitely a lot of different types of challenges, possibly a new established sphere of influences, individuals that challenges the fact looming in the history back is the Helsinki Final Act, of course, and Paris Charter, UN human rights charters, bringing the Yalta kind of in and so on. So with all this package, if you would, Toni, now be able to draft a strategy, what should be done now to get us to the right path, to do some of the things we already kind of discussed, to handle the insecurity that exists around us?
Maybe focusing on the security order here in Europe, the first thing is to make sure that Ukraine will have a just and lasting peace, and that's based on the Helsinki principles and the international law. So that's the first priority. Then how do you get there? Ukraine wants peace. How do you get to the real peace negotiations? You need in the conflict resolution, you would often relate to the mutually hurting stalemate situation. So mutually hurting stalemate is achieved by supporting Ukraine and weakening Russia with sanctions. And there's a need to build up the deterrence in the meanwhile in Europe as a whole, unfortunately. So that is one thing. Now there's a way out for this theory. There's also the way out. One needs a way out. And now Trump has, in a way, offered some type of a process for the way out. But there seems to be a lot that needs to be done. For the Finnish chairpersonship, Finland is chairing the OSCE this year in the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. We consulted all the 57 participating states and also the partner countries, and it came out very clear. That was back in 23-24 when we carried out the consultations, that what you need to do is stick to the principles. So it's one participating state with the support of another one, for sure, that is violating these principles. But I would claim for the spheres of influence, for instance, that there has been quite a lot of reference in different OSCE texts that there is no return to that. That's kind of as long as we stick to these our core principles united together, that's going to be done.
Great. So you mentioned one of the kind of first things, support Ukraine, weaken Russia. Because there is quite a bit happening, at least. Support exists here and there, but what, in your opinion, we could do more?
We can provide always more military assistance to Ukraine. The coalition is now there, coalition of the willing, and really I agree with Nataliya that Europe has really come together now on supporting. So it doesn't look that bad. What needs to be done is to claim accountability for the violations of the Russian Federation, and that is a very important, though very difficult task, knowing how the conflicts and previous wars have tended to end. So that's something the OSCE, it's limited what the OSCE can do, but it's the multilateral system as a whole that needs to pay attention to that. Within the OSCE, there's a weekly meeting in Vienna, and we make sure that the accountability is there, and Russia hears these claims, and there's a Moscow mechanism. Ironically, there's a Moscow mechanism that helps to identify the human rights violations of the Russian Federation.
Great. So then we move on. Veton, you mentioned in your first intervention the shared security connected to shared values. Yeah. And the picture you painted about Europe was not, or the security situation, not so bright. What would you say? What could we do better? What should be done to move forward towards the brighter future?
Well, first identify the challenges ahead. And we can rely on principles and on the past. I don't think necessarily it will help move to the future. The main questions, if you reverse the question of how do you get to a future by identifying the present challenges, is by presenting tough questions. And the tough question is, do European member states and European countries and Europe as a continent, does it believe it can defeat militarily Russia? And depending on that answer, you devise a policy. If there's not going to be a military defeat of Russia, and I think that there is not going to be a military defeat of Russia, then that presents another set of questions and answers for the future of how do we want to devise a security policy and a shared space, a shared European secure space and space of values. If, as I think, the ceasefire, whenever it comes between Ukraine and Russia, will bring a division line that does not necessarily correspond to the former borders of Ukraine, then we have an unfinished conflict. And an unfinished conflict means that we have to face the challenge of an unfinished conflict zone, starting on the borders of Ukraine and ending at Bosnia-Herzegovina, because that's an unfinished conflict as well. Now, if you want to be realistic about the options, then you have to understand that the European shared space could not solve easy questions such as Bosnia-Herzegovina compared to tough questions such as Ukraine. This is the first point. The second point in facing the challenges is that whenever the new ceasefire, whatever modus vivendi is found between Ukraine and Russia, it will not be a post-1945 geography, geopolitics, because we are speaking of China as an important element. The border between Ukraine as the extension of the West, if you will, of Europe to the east, will be the border between Europe and the new Eurasian Massif, in which China has a predominant role. And if this is the case, then we have to think of generating options for a future in which Europe will have its shared European security and value space, will have its voice in that. And the challenges ahead are, and we will probably speak about these in the third part, the challenges ahead are enormous and don't have to do with traditional geopolitics, artificial intelligence one. Okay.
Yeah. So actually, I want to, before next round, sure. Challenges ahead, but this, when you mentioned this unfinished conflict, and that obviously is always a little bit of the danger in the way that if we want to sustainable peace and move forward, if we have unfinished conflicts, that's never a good sign. You might have some lessons learned or identified what you would like to say. What should be done that the unfinished conflict perhaps either would be finished or at least in the way that they are not kind of brewing the next war immediately?
Well, if we take the Western Balkans as an example, these are low-hanging fruit in comparison geopolitical challenges. Resolving the relationship between the Republic of Kosovo and Republic of Serbia is a small challenge compared to Ukraine and Russia or Bosnia and Herzegovina, a fully functioning democratic state that is respecting the will of its citizens and of its nationalities is something doable. But if it's not doable, then it is because it has not been identified as a geopolitical and geostrategic challenge. And now is the time to do it. If you cannot solve Bosnia and Herzegovina, if you cannot solve Kosovo, Serbia, how can you deal with more or bigger challenges that lie ahead? And the challenges that lie ahead will be enormous in the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, or that is Ukraine as a prospective European state, and its neighbor that has historically not wanted Ukraine to become a European state.
Okay. Nataliya, you already mentioned a little bit on this kind of trying to solve kind of details, although important, and so on, to try to move forward and so on. But perhaps you can elaborate on that one, that, you know, what needs to be solved or what should we do better?
I think I would reformulate. So it's not really about the details. It's more about not even walking the talk or not being hypocritical. It's exercising what is written. It's actually, instead of talking, doing. So I'm not really like, it's not about spotting some things and solving small things, but literally doing what is written and kind of following up that if there is a particular law or particular way to reach accountability, it's there. It's not forgotten. Of course, it's very unfortunate that within the last couple of decades, quite a few authoritarian governments, regime countries, learn how to hack the system and how to use these, either the Security Council of the UN or OSCE meetings for their favor, how to use those platforms for their benefit. And of course, there could be some creative ways, how we use the same legislation, the same meetings to be a bit more creative. First of all, not let them do that, but, like to fight with at least our own venues, not just like take it for granted. And, but I think that what is important, and I'm insisting, it's not about dismantling these big existing structures. You mentioned the coalition of willing. In case of Russian-Ukraine, the Russian war, of course, Ukraine is capable to defend itself already with limited support, and I would insist that it's limited. It's so much about the money, but even with that limited support, it's kind of doable. With some better dominance on air, actually a lot more can be done. And now we're in a situation when we can have just, like literally now the Nordic states and a couple more states like the Netherlands, like the UK, are supporting Ukraine, and you already understand that can be enough for deterrence. So it's not something not achievable. In our case, it's first of all deterrence, and I'm not speaking, like fighting an eternal war, exactly what was offered, but by Minister Medinsky on, like during the talks. It's really creating the situation when those people would know if we attack, we'll be stopped. That's the major thing. But I cannot not miss the idea of accountability. And it's not just about, now there is 167,000 of alleged war crimes registered by Ukrainian General Prosecutor Office. Incredible amount. And of course, the accountability shouldn't be pushed out of the discourse of the negotiations. It's very important for future crimes not to happen. And I think this is a guarantee. Accountability should be there. And something to refer to the panels, which I heard earlier at this room. Instead, I think we also need to avoid this kind of playing who is a bigger victim. We need to use all the venues to speak about all the victims. Use the European platform to speak about Gaza. So, for instance, instead of raising the question, you know, how dare we speak about Ukraine if we don't speak about Gaza? We need to speak about Gaza, about starvation in Gaza. And, for instance, now Ukraine have to fight for support of the International Criminal Court, which is attacked because of Gaza, we know it. But, of course, we need to fight that this court exists because it's a part of the accountability. So deterrence, you know, exercising, you know, not just details, but exercising what is written, deterrence and accountability.
Okay. I think, at least I personally am interested of hearing a little bit more, because one of the questions that I think nearly everybody who's dealing with the Russian aggression war against Ukraine is thinking about deterrence, but how to do deterrence against Russia, specifically because the idea, and Russia seems to have been quite successful with that narrative, is that, you know, if, for example, the Western countries are sending the troops, there is a more military aggression or something, then the escalation will start kind of taking up, and we end up in World War III. I mean, to exaggerate a little bit, but nevertheless, so you get my point. How, perhaps in your view, we could do effective deterrence?
I give a different example, and you know, me coming from human rights, I'm always surprised to, you know, speak that much about weapon. But in 2022, there was this deal brokered by Turkey and the UN in Black Sea about the delivery of the Ukrainian grain outside to Africa, Asia, elsewhere. It was very slow. It's in the end, it didn't work. Russia attacked the ports in Odessa, Mykolaiv. And in the end, with some type of weapon, sea drones and something, Ukraine managed to move the Russian fleet back to their borders. And since then, the route was there, and the Ukrainians were capable to ship way more grain without the deal than with the deal. And the figure says it, you know, like within the last 2 years, we can feed more countries with Ukrainian grain than with the deal which is slowing the process. I'm not about dismantling all the deals, but I'm saying, you know, being in the front line, that Russia don't attack when you stop them very early. They move when they see the weakness, and then they take more and more. If they are deterred very early at the stage, the attacks stop. It happens like the whole this spring. We have the attempts to overtake the Kharkiv region, but the Russian attempts are stopped, and they are not there because there is a stronger brigade with a capable military power to stop them on the Ukrainian soil, not really getting into Russia. So I'm saying that and what I want to say, it's not really about the presence of the European troops on the grounds. It's about having opportunity, and they know if something happened, they'll be stopped right away, and it's not just about Europe. And again, like, it's not about like dismantling Russia or something. It should exist, it will exist, you know, we know it.
Okay.
You know it in Finland,
Yeah.
you know it.
Yeah, okay. Great. We'll move on. Karl. You already mentioned in your first intervention in the way that how history should be discussed and talked about, how intellectuals perhaps could do their bit onto the debate and so on. What would be your views on this practical, or what could we do more to get forward?
I think that the stress the European states and especially the European societies are entering will be very, very hard. And I mean, we are still at the beginning of this process and not at the end. I mean, talking about ceasefire, etc., it's early. The stress will go on, and the danger that the fragmentation inside the European Union is a very severe threat. A new divide inside the European societies. I mean, who will pay for the support of Ukraine? These will be very, very serious questions inside all these, in France, in Germany, everywhere. And so One thing is to fight against the destabilization and the disintegration of the European Union and the European societies, and to organize support. That means to be tough, to confront the population with the sacrifices they have to bring, to tell the truth, and to tell. I mean, we need these speeches, the famous speeches of Winston Churchill, and who is now in Europe prepared to give these kind of speeches to tell the population what they have to give. So, struggle for stability against disintegration and against the play of the Russian leadership to play on the contradictions and the domestic divides and inside the European societies. And I'm sure that the repertoire of Putin is not finished. He can play on these internal contradictions, and we have to be ready for this struggle. And that means public opinion, that means cultural work, that means organize a consensus, which is confronting to the real situation, against Ukrainian fatigue, which is everywhere where you can observe everywhere, and to organize a public opinion which understands that that liberty or their way of life is not has a price, and to organize deterrence. I mean, in Germany, to talk about armament, the public opinion, at least 50%, is against militarism. Militarism. What does it mean? It means that the half of the population is not ready to defend itself in the case of emergency. So these are in a certain way very simple things to organize a new consensus to update on the new to the new situation. And here comes something in which has to do with the job of not only military people, but with intellectuals, writers, etc. I mean, to tell what is going on in Ukraine. We had a panel this day about the role of literature. I think it's very, very important to the rise of Ukrainian literature and the popularity of Ukrainian literature in European countries.
So if I can ask a kind of a follow-up and use again this historical knowledge, so to speak, which is a historical narrative that you think should be corrected, which is kind of a lot of majority of people are almost subscribing to something which is referred to history, but it is distorted the understanding of the situation.
The historical narrative, which is very important now, is to break the impact of the Russian narrative that the aggression against Ukraine is the continuation of the struggle against Hitler, and to break this moral, what is it called? The argument of the Russian propaganda, and not only in speeches, but every night, is very useful to look for the Moscow TV channels is that Germany is supporting the fascists and the Nazis in Ukraine, and that the Russian war against Ukraine is the great patriotic war. And this narrative works. It has an impact, and it's appealing to what really has happened. I mean, the unbelievable crimes of the German Wehrmacht and the Nazis, etc., on Soviet territory. This is a fact, and he is playing and using this, and to make independent decisions now in Germany to organize arms and the military support for Ukraine has to break the dominance of this Russian narrative.
Great. Very, very important. I think that was to everybody to note down this one and to make sure that we work against wrong historical narratives, so to speak. Now, we have one more round to go. And after that, I open up it to audience, so think out of your questions. And the final round is, of course, to try to look forward to the future, so to speak. Finland is the chair of the OSCE now. Quite often, the chairs, anyway, talk to the next year, upcoming chair, so that one could try to find for the OSCE work, for example, a certain continuation and so on. And with the idea that that would enhance the security in Europe. Toni, what would be your outlook? What is going to be done? How perhaps this year will help to the future? How do you see that in a futuristic perspective, so to speak?
Yeah, Switzerland is taking the helm of the OSCE next year, and I understand they are in the middle of their planning, so I'm not gonna kind of take their right to do so, but I would assume that also Switzerland will place a lot of emphasis on the principles of the organization and upholding them, respect to the principles, and hence directly from that comes the support to Ukraine, and depending on the situation, we have discussed here on the possible ceasefire in Ukraine. Perhaps we get there later on, but there's lots of contingency being done. Of course, the OSCE has done on that as well. Then the recommendation would be here that it has been lots of days, and with writers, with civil society. I think that's something that should be upheld, that the civil society is actually one of the assets of the OSCE, and we should respect also the history of the Helsinki Final Act. We pay tribute in a way by highlighting the importance of making sure that civil movements are free to act, and that's not happening in many places. There are foreign agent laws, etc. So this kind of I started with human rights, democracy, and rule of law. That needs to be upheld, and there are other organizations like Council of Europe that is doing that work, but that we need to take care of that. Then for looking at the longer perspective, and that's always the question of now it's the time for deterrence, now it's time for armament, but there will be a moment when some type of a dialogue will be needed, for sure. There is a huge wave of basically arms race, rearmament taking place, and we know by fact that at some point there will be a moment when this has to be spiraled back down again. There's a lot of expertise within the OSCE in that area. There's lots of confidence building measures, Vienna document, Open Skies, Convention on the conventional armed forces. So this expertise has to be withheld. There's a concern that this expertise that once was there, how to actually do arms control, is disappearing. We need to maintain that, because there will be a moment when we need it.
So when you mentioned already these documents, for example, and there has been in different contexts, I think, even debate on even the Geneva Agreement on war crimes and things like that, that should things, old document, be updated for the future, for the new kind of situation? Do you see that kind of a need, or do you see, and this is a leading question a little bit, could they be interpreted in a different way, or do you see that, you know, perhaps for now, not to dismantle, like Nataliya said, anything, but we need to be prepared for the fact that something new written needs to come to replace the old?
Yeah, that is a good question in the longer period. In any way, there needs to be should the political process start at some point, there needs to be a framework for that process to discuss different issues. Now, the situation is that all the 57 actually are committed to the Helsinki principles. If you read 10 out, you realize that actually Russia is violating all of them, but they are committed due to the indivisible security concept that there has been a reinterpretation of it. So that discussion needs to take place. There's a firm basis in the existing principles, and that's not only European, it's global. That core is there and needs to be upheld. Whether there's another kind of political agreement recommitting to that later on and adding some new elements, that's another question, but the time is clearly not now.
Okay. Veton, you actually mentioned something rather interesting also in your previous intervention about when you brought in China, and then mentioning this thing that when perhaps one day, and hopefully, there is the peace, that Ukrainian border might be a border between Europe and Eurasia. That was already a little bit futuristic, looking forward, foresight. Would you give us your picture on the world in 10 years' time? How do you see? Where are these things taking us now?
Okay, we can measure it by several indicators. Let's take a light bulb. When you ask a question to ChatGPT, any question, it takes 20 minutes of energy of a light bulb. In the process of asking questions to ChatGPT, which we all use and we will all use more and more, there will be more demand for energy. At the end of this century, there will be a deficit of 7 to 8% of energy supply, only based on artificial intelligence use. And that means that we are in a new world in terms of energy consumptions, and why? The second element is that at the beginning of the century, Chinese middle class came up to maybe 4 to 5% of the population. Now, in the quarter of the century, they are the same as the United States middle class. Now, what comes out of this statistics are two forms of governance and two forms of government culture. One in which democracy and free market go together, and this is something we grew up with most of us since 1989. The other is that free markets and capitalism does not need liberty, that it can be a controlled type of capitalism, and that it can succeed in revolutionizing societies. Now, whenever that happens, and this will happen probably within this decade, the division line between Ukraine and Eurasia will also be a division line of two systems of liberties, an understanding of liberties and functioning democracies and market production. All this now will be linked with artificial intelligence, which can be a challenge for democracies as well. It could be a good tool for democracies. It could be a bad tool for democracy, or a tool against democracies. Now, these are all challenges that we have to take together. And when we see the war in Ukraine, we have to see it in its totality of global change. There is not going to be a return to a previous state.
Okay, and just a little more on this, since you brought now in the AI and the conflicts. You mentioned bad tool or good tool. How do you see AI possibly affecting either good way or bad way solving conflicts or war? Or not solving?
Well, follow the money in AI. And if you see where the money is, presently it's not on the side of democracy, is it? If you see the arrangements that will be built in the future, and this will be part of something that was announced much earlier by Brzezinski in his chess game of geopolitics, is that there's going to be a strategic pivot to the east. Now, 25 years or more ago, he spoke of Ukraine as the pivot. He also spoke about the Middle East. We have now seen only in this week the potential of what is going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years, which is the Middle East being transformed not only into an energy hub, but also in an AI hub. And this will have an enormous potential, transformative potential. It can have a positive, it can have a negative potential. Now, the question for Europeans is, how do we engage in this transformative next quarter century, which is what we are now living?
Great, thank you. I had, in fact, last semester at the College of Europe, a student who made a master thesis on AI as a negotiation tool for political purposes, and it's in a private side. And I learned a lot from her thesis, and I was a bit kind of puzzled how cultural issues will be brought into it. But obviously, that is development that is coming.
On this side, I asked AI about how to solve Kosovo and Serbia. They had an excellent solution. I sent it to a Serbian friend. He agreed totally with it. I didn't say it was ChatGPT. He claimed it was my idea.
Well, interesting example. Nataliya, you did say when you started that there was these two first came with the bleak start, and you actually said, no, I see a little bit of hope, which is a surprising thinking of the situation and the ground, which I like it a lot. Can you give us, in fact, positive, or is it just now you see it positive and you see future actually a bit more gloomier, or how do you see this development now forward?
So the best thing which happened to me personally after the full-scale invasion is I used to postpone things, and now I'm living in present. I really appreciate my life for the last 3 years. Sometimes it can be, very grim if you speak about from a different perspective. We had a chance to make a report. I'm working on the project on documenting war crimes, and we had a chance to talk to the local prosecutor in Mykolaiv region in southern Ukraine, who is very much in a rush to, investigate those cases with horrible motivation, because she doesn't know if she survives tomorrow. That's why she is, speeding up. And I also think that we need to think about tomorrow, when the crisis is there. But mainly because for us, we treat the war and what's happening as a hard labor. It's just everyday hard labor for the rescue worker who saved a person today, for a doctor who saves a person today, a soldier who also saves a person today, something to appreciate. That's why I'm really, very cautious about those talks about fatigue, the terms. I've been asked about Ukraine's fatigue as soon as April 2022 on the first conference with the journalists. Because I think the fatigue comes generally from the proposition of we are powerless. And I don't think I am. I think I can do still a lot, and we all still can do a lot. I work with the horrible things, listening to the testimonies of the survivors. Every of them is inspirational about the courage of those humans surviving that most darkest moment and like finding some light in the end of the tunnel. It's hard for them, but we still can do something for each of them. And that is my call. So you mentioned fatigue in terms of this European fatigue regarding Ukraine. You know, so for me it's all relevant because I usually, for the last couple of years, travel and work with, let's say, difficult places. Brazil, South Africa, you know, I need to explain complex issue for the Arab countries. It's my first time in the Nordic states since the full-scale invasion. I do not take for granted that Ukrainian flag over the Helsinki Central Station. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We don't take it for granted. I'm truly surprised. You know, like in Kiev, I don't know it's even there. There are some people putting those flags, you know, I heard about that, but, you know, I do not take it for granted, and it's very important not to take it for granted. That's why I generally think, like, in all the European debates, I always, you know, try to shape them when I talk to my colleagues, partners, friends, journalists, saying like, why you constantly write or speak about all the threats and about everything we can lose? Let's speak about how much we can protect. You know, Professor Schlögel started speaking about this area. It's something to protect. Ukraine has so much for the last 12 years of me, you know, coming, and not 12 years, my students' years and my career started during the Orange Revolution. We have free media. We have democracy. We like our country. It's a worthy country to live and protect. Why? So I think like we all can discuss here in Finland, everywhere, and I do think this motivation makes us, you know, like a bit better if you know what you need to protect instead of all the time speaking how much we can lose.
Okay, so what's your wish for the future? You said that living today is important, which is true, looking at it from the positive side, working hard, absolutely. Wish for kind of, if you look at to 5 or 10 years, where would you like to see either, you know, Ukraine or Europe altogether?
Yeah, it's being very serious, repeating myself, walking the talk, you know, and I think that's something to do. It won't be perfect, it won't be difficult, but it never would be perfect. You know, when you talk to historians, it was never really good. So I do think we need to really defend, you know, our freedoms, first of all, but always also trust the people. In this regard, I do think for Ukrainians, we know what saves lives. Trust us. At this stage, we know what saves lives and what doesn't. So if we try to argue that this is exactly what can save lives, listen, and then we can have pretty reasonable life. But honestly, as my generation, and it's something important to mention, because I remember Donetsk when Beyoncé was singing in Arena Stadium. It was not so far long ago. It was 15 years ago. Now it's a warlord-run, horrible, kind of anti-utopian place. It's not North Korea, which has been created in 1953. I saw myself this change. So I don't think really, you know, we can survive. Our life can be good in Kiev, in Helsinki, in Lviv, in Kharkiv, but it shouldn't be on the expense of the people left behind in Crimea and the Donbass. So if you really speak about Ukraine, I don't think that we need to allow those generations to stay at that gray zone, because we know if we don't solve it, it'll stay forever. So my dream, my kind of vision, it's not a dream, is like let's those generation of Ukrainians living in these territories don't live in these horrible places for the next decades.
Okay, and Karl, how does historian look to the future? In the way that from all the historical knowledge and studying on that and so on, how do you take that kind of looking forward? And how does it look to you, Europe, when you look forward?
What I learned from history is that you cannot say in advance what will happen. And I mean, even in my lifetime, there have been events which were not in my horizon. For instance, 9/11. It was a new picture of a new world, the end of a certain era. And of course, the annexation of Crimea, it was for me a shock, which forced me to read the entire history. And it was not February 2022, it was Crimea. So even in the last years, our experts did not expect that something happened like the Prigozhin adventure, or that about 800,000 young people from Russia moved across the border to Kazakhstan, to Georgia, to Turkey, etc., escape the mobilization. So nobody of our experts expected that the Ukrainian army would resist and make a counterattack in Kiev and in Kharkiv. So for me, it is quite open. And I would say it would be, I cannot think about what is going on in 20 years. My imagination is too poor for this. But what I would like that we are doing more intensively is to listen what's going on inside, in this case, Russia. I mean, we are so fixed on this person at the top, Putin, what is in his brains and what he is orchestrating, that he's a master choreographer of threats and fear and nuclear bombs, etc. But what is going on in this huge country? I mean, when I take a lesson from history, one of these events in the Crimea War, the outcome was the fundamental reforms of the late Tsarist Empire, the Russian-Japanese War. That was the start of the Russian Revolution in 1905 up to the end of the Civil War. So I do not plea for the black swans, which will save us. But my motto is to be prepared for everything, that everything is possible, and we don't even know what is going on tomorrow. But what we can say for sure is that we have to defend ourselves. And I mean not only Germans, but in this case, the Ukrainians are defending Europe. This we know for sure and exactly. But kind of prophecy, what is going on with the post-war Russia, I have no idea. There are huge discussions in the exile from invention of a new Russian Federation up to apocalyptical scenarios of civil wars and interregional wars, etc. I have no fantasy for this. And looking what's going on now, to listen, to see, and it's hard. I was 2 days ago in Narva. Years ago, you could just go in 3 hours from Tallinn to Petersburg or from Helsinki to Petersburg. Now I cannot go. I cannot listen. I cannot look. And maybe we have to cooperate much more with the people who are living now in exile, the Russian exile.
So even if you said that you cannot imagine, but luckily you mentioned 20 years, because now I still ask you to imagine a bit, this kind of a changing event, because you mentioned 9/11 and annexation of Crimea. Can you imagine, but not 20 years, I'm not asking to do that, but in some kind of a very near future, what could be an event that has that kind of a changing, shifting dynamics, changing aspect? Can you imagine at least a bit for us?
Yeah, first I think we didn't talk about America. I think that despite all these terrible things with this Trump at the top, and despite all what happened in the Oval Office, America is still existing. The biggest, richest, most powerful democracy in the world. So we should not forget this. This is one point. And the second, it could be that under the threat of aggression from outside, Europe could reinvent in a certain way. And there have been situations, and I have in the last time reread the books from Raymond Aron in defense of the decadent Europe. And I would say Raymond Aron was a very, very precise observer and analyst. So I think it is not excluded the process of reinvention of a provincialized Europe. So a redefinition of Europe in the new global play. And so I'm not without hope, but I have no ideas for what is going on in 30 or 40 years.
Thank you. That was, anyway, very, very interesting. Now we have finished our rounds. And in fact, we should have at least 15 minutes time for Q&A. So I invite
10 minutes.
10 minutes. 10 minutes for Q&A. Yes. So please. Ooh. Or 5 minutes. Yes, please, there. And present yourself.
Yeah, Henry Fox from the University of Turku. Thanks for your excellent interventions. I've been reading a big, huge book by Benjamin Nathan, I think his name is, on the Russian dissident movement. And the point is there that the movement actually started off in the 1950s with people who said that we need to stick to the Soviet constitution. Respect the constitution. I wonder whether this idea could be something for Europe also in the future. Could there be some sort of a parallel?
Actually, now you answer all round, and that's the last round. Since I did not see very quickly any hands, and was there a, okay, one there. Let's take that as well. And then you answer at the same time, because I looked at the wrong clock there.
You, Veton, said that look where the money is going. And I actually think that is the problem. And at present we have, rules, ESG, that private investors should invest in. But Fogh Rasmussen, the former NATO Secretary General, introduced that we should, in those principles where we are investing, introduce a D, that it should be equally acceptable to invest in defense. And second, we are using indexes for investments that do not take any account of democracy. Could that also be introduced? Because I think that you have pointed to one of the many problems. And finally, I cannot refrain from quoting Kara Murza, who in Frankfurt in December told, democracy movements in Russia have happened after defeat, in military defeat. You mentioned the Japanese-Russia war, we know Crimea war and so on. Finally, I should have introduced myself, but I was so worried that Hanna wouldn't give me time. My name is Astrid Thors, I'm former this and that, and have also worked with the OSCE.
Thank you. That was a good reverse order. Your replies to the questions and your final whatever you feel that you want to still say, but short and sharp. And we start with Karl.
I have read the book of Benjamin Nathan's, but I didn't get your question, I have to say.
Whether we should stick to the constitution.
Yes. Yeah, right. Yeah, that was a very interesting period in the history of the dissidents to refer to the constitution, even the Stalinist constitution of 36. That was the same game as the dissidents in Eastern Europe referred to the Helsinki Final Act. And insofar, that was a certain period in the history of dissident, which came to an end in the 70s, when people organized themselves and stopped to refer to the Constitution. Yeah, to the question. The economics, I can't say, maybe
Okay, Nataliya?
So prior to the full-scale invasion, our organization did a number of the research, what was lacking in the society to get unity or something. And a lot of Ukrainians felt kind of that they're not empowered. It was like one of the why people believed in some of conspiratorial thinking, mainly because they didn't feel like something matters, their actions matter. What I feel today, that, in Ukraine, why things work, because somehow every person, not every, but quite a lot, bounded to do something. You either serve to your community as a volunteer in a village, you probably serve in the army or send your kids to the army or brothers, and in return, you feel that the government and this country are accountable to you. What I'm saying that Ukrainians are exercising citizenship every single day, most of us, to extent we were not forced to do that. So I think for me, it's not about sticking to the constitutions. It's really the problem which I feel, that a lot of people just delegate the idea of the democracy to one day when you elect officials or you generally pay taxes. So instead of being citizen, you're a taxpayer. For me, the major idea is that if you really exercise your citizenship, participate in the politics, that's the answer. And really briefly, you mentioned the East, but I do think that also being a lot in Asia and following a lot, money, there are a lot of democratic societies globally. We shouldn't think about the rest of the world as not democratic. People in Latin America, Asia, Africa, they're fighting for democracy. There are way more things to connect with them based on values.
Okay, Veton.
Yes. When I spoke about follow the money, I was thinking of the conflict, the discrepancy that exists between democracy and technological oligarchy. And this is the big challenge for our societies today. If Mr. Zuckerberg or Mr. Musk can have an enormous influence unchecked by any forms of democracy on our lives, then this is an enormous problem for a democracy. We are at the initial stages of this, but this is one of the most serious challenges of our democratic life in the future.
Great. Toni, I appreciate short and sharp.
Yeah. Okay, I think the answers came, and we need creative kind of alternatives and new ways of protecting our democracy. But just wanted to highlight one event, 31st of July in this very building, when it's the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. We will bring in loud and clear message on the importance of the Helsinki principles. And secondly, it will be very much civil society event, so it will be a house full of civil society representatives. That's what we want to highlight during our chairpersonship.
Great. Thank you very much. When I started this panel by saying that situational awareness is one of the key issues, also to find perhaps ways forward, we have learned in this panel basically that situational awareness is needed for early warning, to be able to tackle rising threats early on. We need to have our geopolitical priorities very clear to be able to also find the common voice, so to speak. We need to use the situational awareness to find connections and identify the different threats and find our own interest in it. One of the things that I learned also from the Helsinki Effect film was the fact that even if the interests are not coinciding, but if everybody finds their own interest in it, then you can kind of work together. It seems so that the responsibility, in fact, lies on all of us, not only on few, based on my excellent panel. We also need to imagine perhaps more and use the creativity we have to have the preparedness and foresight for the future, and definitely expect the unexpected. Join me of thanking my excellent panel for all insights. Thank you. And now there is a break till past, coffee outside. So 17:30 we continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Okay.
A little bit of choreography. We can do it here. It's very quick. I mean, we've agreed on
dahin. Ich stehe ein bisschen hinter dir. Ist das so recht?
Das ist recht, ja. We start. Good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everybody. My name is Ingo Schulze, and I, on behalf of the German, die Deutsche Akademie für Sprache und Dichtung, I want to say thank you for all these interesting panels and lectures and lessons. I'm very glad that I was able to hear this, and I learned a lot, and I'm inspired, and for me it was a great moment to listen to all these discussions. As a guest of this country, I was especially impressed by Finland's self-critical attitude with regard to the situation of its minorities. This spirit, this self-critical attitude, should give us a confidence that the future does not belong to the extreme right-wing parties, and it should be a model for our own actions. I'm convinced that there is no freedom without equality, without social justice, without security. And I think it is important to talk about what needs to be done, what we need to focus our attention on, and what we should spend money on it in order to protect our societies from social, economic, and cultural polarization. To prevent the polarization of the society also means protecting it from nationalist and racist attitudes and parties. Tomorrow we will be looking to Romania, where the second round of the presidential election is going to take place, and we will look to the presidential election in Poland. For me, growing up in East Germany, the Helsinki Agreement was a point of reference, a source of protection, and a wealth of arguments, even though the GDR government ignored many of the demands at this time. The rapprochement between the two hostile blocs was based on the insight that there would be no winners in a war, only losers, and that the survival of humanity would be called into question. This is no less relevant today than it was then. Security and cooperation remain the key concepts in international relations. Our future will depend on how we will interpret it. Literature and art always deal with representation, a temporal and spatial representation. We have to be aware of all the many wars, of course the war against Ukraine, but there will be no peace in Europe without peace in the Middle East. Our academy has around 190 members from 26 countries, some of whom hold very different views on various issues and express these publicly. We also see it as our task to facilitate open discussions in which different arguments are heard and debated, but the protagonists tolerate and respect each other. The debates on Europe are an important opportunity for us to participate in such discussions in a public and international setting.
Good afternoon. Honored friends and participants of the Helsinki Debate on Europe, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Antje Koncius. I'm director of the Samuel Fischer Foundation. And on behalf of this foundation, it is my great pleasure to say just a few words before we jointly will have the possibility to listen to our last panel's thoughts on the world of tomorrow. The debates on Europe started in 2012 as an act of solidarity with the already then threatened civil society in Hungary. Together with the German Academy for Language and Literature, the Fischer Foundation decided that it was time to look outwards. So we invited a group of European intellectuals, writers, historians, scientists, to go to Budapest and to see out there what the situation looks like. For us, it was in the foundation, it was the consistent continuation of the work we had been trying to support and to accomplish since the beginning of our activities in 2003. To understand the concept of translation in the broadest sense, namely the exchange of ideas, experiences, insights, and, in the end, of texts. And to make this kind of exchange possible in Europe, between its north and south, west and north, south and east, east and west, between Kosovo and Serbia, Belarus and Lithuania, Romania and Bulgaria, and so on. In the end, we learned that it is all about trust, honesty, independence, understanding, open-mindedness, and mutual values. Otherwise, the mutual endeavor of deconstructing wrong-leading myths and destructive narratives is not possible. Only this might hopefully lead to new perspectives and might foster ambitions. Taking this into account, you may imagine how glad and grateful we are, and I am, ad personam and ex officio, that the cooperation between the German Academy and the Fischer Foundation steps into its 14th year. But that since 2012, we were the lucky ones who found like-minded partners and people in every city, at every place we went to. Saying this, it is time to say thank you here in Helsinki. And I would like to start with saying thank you to Johanna Kettola from the Finnish Foreign Office and express our gratitude to Jumi Laaksonen of the Task Force for the Finnish OSCE Chairpersonship. Thank you for your support and trust from the first contacts of my colleagues here in Helsinki until today.
And thank you for the German ambassador, Stefan Auer, and also a big thank you to our cultural attaché, Joseph Hinterseer.
A big thank you to Victor Andersson and Håkan Fairgård from Hanna. I tried it so hard. Van Hanna. Hanna Sari. I can't do it in the Swedish way. I'm sorry, Karl-Henrik. You exposed us really to an hospitality and cooperation sui generis.
And we want to thank our dear friends from the Finland-Institut, to Suvi Vartjuvara, to Vivi Tiderstedt, and to my old fellow Mikko Fritze.
And I would say a big thank you to my dear colleagues at S. Fischer Stiftung, to my dear long-year colleague and Deputy Eileen Rieger, to my yet very young but also very close colleague Sophie Strauss, and to my dear colleague, he feels sometimes free, but he's not, Karl-Henrik Fredriksson. Amen. It was moving, it was impressing, and again, kind of unforgettable how you, with your commitment, empathy, creativity, kindness, and energy realized as Fisher Foundation being a part of the Helsinki debate on Europe. I thank you with heart and hand.
And last but not least, I will give a big thank you to the staff of our Academy Office, Corinna Blattmann, Lilian Rank, and our General Secretary, Rainer Godel. I was not so involved in the preparation, but I know they did a great work. Thank you for this. And also, big thank you, Karl-Henrik, from me, for all your ideas and your spirit and your Karl-Henrik soul around us.
But it's not over yet. We will discover that the world of tomorrow is very much also the world of the past. And the narratives we need to have with us into the world of tomorrow are very much based on a proper understanding of the past. And the two last speakers today, who will first give each of them a speech, followed by a few questions from me, and then a discussion together at the very end. They represent what's east of us. Because east of where we're sitting is the 1,340-kilometer long border. The longest border that exists between NATO and Russia. The longest border that exists between the European Union and Russia. This is what we sometimes call the eastern flank of NATO, or the central front line. If not, the central front line is in Ukraine. But this is where we... And this movement, this position, is in a way illustrated by the two voices we will hear. That's not how it's structured, because they're writers. So they will talk from their heart, from their writing, from their observing. It's not a duet, but it represents this 1,340 kilometers long border. And now I leave the floor to Rosa Liksom, one of Finland's most exciting writers, and you will hear why.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I decided to address two questions that continue to puzzle me. What can literature do to dismantle structures of violence? And why do we still need the peace movement? My interest in peace and ecological issues and dismantling structures of violence stems from my own experiences. Until I moved away from home at the age of 15, I lived in a household where the war traumas of men who had fought on the front line during the Second World War and during the Lapland War were daily concrete presence. Men who had been mentally broken at the front vented their anxiety and rage at home. Their rage affected on humans, other species, and surrounding nature. The operating models of aggression and violence internalized in wars, intertwined with silence, passes from generation to the next. Today, the results of these operating models can be seen as clear-cut forest, drained swamps, open-pit mines, and polluted waterways. Traumas left by wars are familiar to many Finns. Having lived through this, I joined the anti-Vietnam War movement while still in the secondary school, and later became involved in the peace and environmental movements during the high school. Jean-Paul Sartre, the philosopher that survived the horrors of the Second World War, demanded his contemporaries, especially authors, to take a look in the mirror. He demands committed literature, not to tame the authors to be servants of political tendencies, but to get people in counter the total degradation of the Western civilization and the complete decadence of enlightenment in the heart of Europe after Auschwitz with honesty. When we look at the world today, we can ask how far we have got from the post-war decadence. In 1955, when the United States had destroyed 10 years previously the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear bombs in Japan, the philosopher Bernard Russell published a petition against nuclear weapons. The most famous person who signed the manifest was the physicist Albert Einstein. The central part of the petition is this. Here then is the problem which we present to you, stark, dreadful, and inescapable. Shall we put end to the human race, or shall mankind renounce war? When Finland joined the world's biggest military alliance, NATO, in 2023, our leaders emphasized that the deterrence of NATO is precisely based on nuclear weapons. Now that Finland is a member of NATO and the placement of the nuclear weapons is not considered impossible anymore, the politicians have started to use the term nuclear shield. The balance of terror maintained by the shield does not take into account the fact that in nuclear war, entire nations, animals, forests, water systems, and the air we breathe will be destroyed. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons of the United Nations that came into effect in January 2021 aims at that. None of the countries that have nuclear weapons or is a member of NATO, Finland included, has not signed the agreement. United States, Israel, Russia, Pakistan, India, even leaders in Germany France, and the Great Britain have recently raised the possibility of limited nuclear war. We all know that the nuclear war would cause radical climate disruption and global starvation. It will be the end of civilization. The only way to prevent nuclear war is the complete destruction of nuclear weapons. US Republican President Eisenhower warned as early as 1961 about the dangers of the growth of the military-industrial complex. He meant the military, political, and economic power are strongly intertwined together and form a threat to peace and democracy. We have ended up living in the time that President Eisenhower warned us about. Militarization and everyday talk about security and defense is also stripping away democracy and giving power to military forces. Now I have to take a little bit of water. According to the war researcher Susanna Hast, violence originates in language. It is conceptualized, strategized, and initiated through discourse. The use of terminology such as referring war as a conflict, fight against terrorism, or the liberalization of territories serves to obscure the true nature of events. Once war has brought into everyday language, fighting becomes a natural extension of our words. We also live in a time when the world order created after World War II is falling apart. World's leading powers are breaking away or have broken away from democracy. We can ask ourselves what we have learned from the wars, what we have learned from history in general. All actions we do here on our planet have a global impact, and we need global institutions to solve these. Global institutions which are currently treated with disintegration by many powers. Acting in peace and ecological movement is nowadays seen as an idealistic delirium from the past. In fact, the peace and the ecological movement might be needed more than ever. They are needed to remind that there is a choice for militarism. There is a choice for vast ecological destruction. There is a choice for eco-wars. These movements are needed to demand following and developing international justice. promoting and building of demilitarized zones, and destruction of nuclear weapons. These movements are needed to demand maintaining the belief in world peace and non-violent actions in these movements. We need also peace and ecological movement for building the kind of communication with respect the democratic society. It is good to remember that every person's contribution to the peace movement and ecological action that will help in this process is meaningful. Because many of the changes start from small movements, tiny streams that form a big river. For example, the civil movement against the Vietnam War, the courage to resist one of the biggest colonialist powers of country's pacifistic movement have changed the course of history in an important way. Today, people's movements such as Elokapina, the Finnish branch of Extinction Rebellion, the global climate movement, environmental and peace movements, Stop Ecocide movement, sustainability elders for the planet, and feminist scholars of militarism act as a counterforce to destruction. If we take into account that the current emission from warfare and the militaristic industrial complex are among the most destructive to the environment in the world, as a committed author, I aim to uncover the roots of violence and illustrate how literature can actively contribute to finding a counterbalance. My focus is on reshaping the narrative of a human being who champions militarism and survival of fittest, reconceptualizing their existence within the broader web of life that includes all species. Although the setting of my novels used to be historical, their writing has been motivated by burning questions of today. How to share experience of violence and exclusion through literature. How to rewrite man and his place in the nature and among other species. How to find a living connection to the layers of our existence that human-centered modernism had tragically lost over the past centuries. How to blend the literature narrative to reveal a simple truth that we have stubbornly denied for a long time. Nature does not need man, but man needs nature to live. As an art historian, Anita Seppä emphasized, we live at a pivotal moment in history when the power to redefine our future still lies within our grasp. The green transition is not sustainable if we do not swiftly connect environmental efforts with long-term peace building and diplomacy. This endeavor necessitates radically new ways of envisioning the world within and around us. Literature and arts play a critical role in this essential and reimagining process. The time to start this transformative work is today. Ladies and gentlemen, peace is power. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you.
Thank you also for finding new ways of repeating, a tradition that started with Berta von Suttner and her reactions to the militarism of her times, and trying to find, and she was also trying to describe the mechanisms of how militarism escalates. But if we try looking practically into you and your writing, because as I started by saying that the world of the future is very much shaped by the narratives of the past, and also how we understand war, when we envision defense or defending our country, it's shaped by how we understand war. And for example, your latest novel, in Swedish Älven, in Finnish Väylä. No?
Väylä. And English, the river.
It's a very specific river, and it takes us north.
Yes.
Because also, we can say that, maybe Finland's history in World War II is not as widely known as other chapters of World War II. But also within Finland and within the Nordic countries, there's a special narrative of the North that's not always widely known. And this has been your focus, right? So how would you say that, all these words that you gave in your peace speech, how does this become writing for you?
One reason why the Lapland War is ignored is because Lapland used to be wasteland.
Maybe we should say what the Lapland War is, just so that everyone chronologically... So after the Winter War, there was a continuation war. And after the continuation war, there was a Lapland War.
Yeah.
So let's start there.
Okay, so let's say so that Lapland War was a very peculiar war because we fought with Germans, Nazi Germans. And when I'm abroad, so people have very difficult to understand that how you can fight with Germans and you don't have any border to Germany. But it happened because during the whole Second World War, we had more than 200,000 German soldiers living in Lapland, also in my home village. And when Finland made a peace agreement with the Soviet Union, so one part of that peace agreement was that German soldiers have to go away from Lapland. And
that is to Norway.
Yeah, to the boats waiting for them in the Arctic Sea. That didn't happen, and so began the war between Finland and Germany in Lapland, and it was so bloody war because Finnish army sent it to the front in Lapland, boys like 15, 16 years old, and they got only 2 weeks training how to shoot on the front line. and Germans were very, very well educated war heroes, Alp soldiers.
Veterans of the former wars.
So all these boys died. It was a terrible experience, for example, in my village, because the older boys died on the Eastern Front, younger boys died against Germany, and so on. And I have
it also brought enormous destruction to nature, right?
Yes, it was a terrible war in any way, because when the Germans went away, they burnt everything.
Villages,
all the houses,
forests,
villages, forests, everything. And 100,000 mines they put into the nature. And we can still find these landmines, still. Every summer we can find 1-2 landmines. And hundreds, thousands of reindeers has died when they, and bears and whatever animals when they tramp on these mines. But anyway, so this was the picture, which is very familiar to me, because my parents, especially my mother, went with cows to Sweden, because the idea was that all the civilians with cows have to move to Sweden over the Tornio River, because army and the people in power in Finland, they knew that that German will use this method of burning everything when they go away. And that was one idea to get rid of this mass slaughter of civilians. So my mother went with cows from my home village for 4 weeks, walking with cows. It was raining. It was late autumn, so it was raining, and then it was snow. With cows to Sweden and looking for a refugee camp to live. And when I was young, so my mother, when I asked about this time in refugee camp in Sweden and all this way to Sweden, so she always said everything was fine. Everything was like it went so easily, and because she didn't want to tell about it. And this is the case concerning every person who was who had to go to Sweden and who had to live in these refugee camps like many months. There were a lot of people who lived all winter long there. And all these facilities in these camps were very limited, let's say so. But also when my mother was like 80 years old, and also her sisters, she had 8 sisters, they were all also living in different camps in Sweden. So they began to tell about it, how it really was. And it was not a beautiful story. There was like sexual abuse on the way and harassment on the way. There was different kind of things. And a lot of children died during that winter in these camps. And a lot of senior persons died. And one of the very difficult thing to Finnish people or Laplanders was that they have to bury these relatives, close relatives in Sweden. And after war, they knew that they can't go there to take care of these graves. Okay.
Rosa, but coming up, I mean, no, because I mean, it is an extremely interesting history because it's. I mean, I can assert as a Swede that the Lapland War. I mean, yes, people know that it existed, but it's really not described, and also in general the Arctic. The Arctic World War II is not always very known, but why was this important for you to describe in the book? I mean, what would you? I mean, in terms of narrative, just in a few sentences. I mean, what would you like me reading the book to take with me?
I don't have answer to that, but I can say why I begin to write this book and work with this part of history. In fact, I had idea. I wanted to write a novel where I can describe a close relation between human being and other species. I have been born in a house with a lot of different kind of species and in the middle of forest. So I know, I have my own experiences how you can really live together with other species, and also you can live part of the nature. I have experienced it, and also my mother, and then I realized that this Lapland war, when the civilians had to start this long hiking to Swedish refugee camps. So it was just like match in heaven, because I had my mother, I had these cows, and I had all this journey, what she did. And my mother was a person who really lived as a part of the nature. And also my father and grandparents. If I think situation that I travel with them with a time machine to Stone Age. So these, my parents and my grandparents, can live totally in these circumstances during the Stone Age. So
it's time for us to wrap up this session. I will ask you to wait until I invite you back on stage.
Yeah, thank you.
Rosa, we will continue in a moment.
Thank you for you. It was my pleasure to have this opportunity to speak about peace and environmental movements. Thank you.
Thank you. And our second speaker is a Russian writer, Sergei Lebedev, who lives in Potsdam since many years in Germany. And I mean, full disclosure, a close personal friend, and a voice that at least I always go back to. Because I think we need to understand, I mean, there are many voices coming from Russia. I always claim that since the full-scale invasion, there is no room for business as usual when it comes to how we look at Russia, how we describe Russia, what we publish, what we translate. What the Ukrainians are facing is forcing us to leave everything that's business as usual. We need to find new ways, new understanding. But we need to understand. Because if we maintain the image of something that we're just projecting and not fully understanding, we're creating a monster that we're just fearing, but we cannot do anything with it. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Sergei Lebedev.
Being Russian and digging into Russia's past almost my whole life, attempting to expose the roots of the destruction my country brought into the world, I think it's only appropriate for me to speak up from this perspective, to try to understand what was fatally overlooked. We often hear that Russia's inability or unwillingness to deal with the crimes of its own past, to take responsibility and restore justice, has led to the restoration of tyranny and the military aggression. Such narrative usually focuses only on internal Soviet deeds, forced collectivization, the Great Terror of the 30s, the Gulag system, and so on. Some of these things were nominally recognized as crimes, but no attempt was made to hold the perpetrators to account. Russia's perestroika Democrats were generally opposed to any substantial lustration or other measures of transitional justice. But I would dare to say that the most politically sensitive Soviet crime is and was nearly always left out of the discussion. And Russia's failure to address this particular crime is far more dangerous and one that affects the fate of many nations. This crime is the Soviet occupation of Central and Eastern Europe, which lasted for decades, resulted in many dead and arrested, the destruction of social and cultural life and freedom. The gravity of injustice was immense. Internal Soviet crimes, which went unpunished, were at least legally admitted as crimes. External aggression and occupation were not, and even Russian dissidents and liberals never seriously risked raising this issue in legal terms. This is why, in relation to Central and Eastern Europe, there are two concepts of memory and history that normally cannot coexist, that clash and contradict each other. They are totally opposed. They cannot be reconciled by any diplomacy. That is Soviet liberation versus Soviet occupation. It was only when Soviet troops finally withdrew from Eastern and Central Europe 45 years after the end of the World War II that the true liberation came, when the Soviet Union collapsed and occupied nations found their way to independence. But it was easier to restore or establish statehood and independence than to achieve the sovereignty of historical memory. The progressive image of the late Soviet Union, the high hopes of the moment, shielded Moscow from serious criticisms and accusations related to the occupation. This restraint was the result of a surfeit of trust, or maybe just a cautionary pragmatism, the desire not to irritate Moscow and undermine its goodwill, not to burden the losers of the Cold War too much. But the most important protection Moscow enjoyed was, of course, based on the status of being a victor over Nazism. Russia, as a self-proclaimed successor state to the USSR, has built its international political profile on the Soviet liberation myth, which provides moral capital and prescribes to the former occupied territories a debt and gratitude for their liberation. This narrative has depicted Russia as the main victim of German aggression, and it has reinforced by the international dignitaries who have attended the anniversary celebrations in Moscow throughout the years. Yes, the Soviet losses were real, and it's yet truly tragic that these losses helped to subjugate nations longing for freedom, to replace one dictatorship with another. The Soviet soldier whose status still marked the landscape of Europe from Berlin to Sofia was not a liberator. And no amount of blood shed by Soviets to defeat the Nazis can excuse the Soviet own role as occupiers. It is not accidental that the Soviets were so reluctant to recognize even the very existence of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. In modern Russia, to make any equivalence between the roles of the USSR and the Nazis is criminalized. In 1939 and in 1940, the Soviet Union occupied Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, the parts of Poland, Finland and Romania. For 22 months, it was a faithful ally of the Nazi Germany. This first wave of Soviet occupations can in no way be disguised as a struggle against the Nazism, and it reveals the real intention of the Soviets. What then followed was in fact a geographically extended reoccupation. This was a separate aim of the war, not necessarily connected to one to defeat the Nazis. Unfortunately, such understanding of the Soviet occupation as a crime has not become a tantamount part of European history. It is geographically limited to the East, blurred, insufficiently represented, remaining a part of national histories, and not forming a powerful international narrative shared across the continent. Yet, this understanding has a profound bearing on modern European life, and it is a key to European security. Only when you fully grasp the cruelty of the consequences of the Soviet occupation can you comprehend the concerns of Russia's closest neighbors, their historically grounded fears, and their need for safety. Eastern regions of Ukraine are currently occupied by Russian troops. For the first time since 1989, extremely large areas of the European continent, home to millions of people, are under the total control of the invading states. But it seems that too many Europeans had already forgotten what this particular type of occupation means. The current occupation zone is a black hole for media. The recent case of Ukrainian journalist Viktoria Roshina, who tried to report on the grim reality of the occupied territories and was tortured to death by Russian state security units, is evidence for this. But what we do know is enough to draw a direct comparison with the brutality of the early Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe. Russian citizenship is being forcibly imposed. In fact, this is a mass expulsion program, because those who do not agree will be treated as foreigners and forced to leave. It signals that Russia is pursuing the same path as the USSR did, for example, in relation to the Baltic states, aiming to Russify the conquered region, rearrange its national composition, and make it a part of its states. Property is being confiscated. Settlers are brought to form the backbone of the occupation regime. The politics of memory is reversed. Monuments marking Soviet crimes disappear. Streets are given back their Soviet names as a symbol of Russian domination. All this is a part of the attack on national identity, an attempt to erase it. The Russian state security services use so-called filtration techniques extensively, and anyone deemed politically unreliable can be imprisoned. Severe torture and sexualized violence are widespread. Ukrainian prisoners of war released from captivity report the same torture, abuse, and deliberate malnutrition, aimed at breaking them physically and mentally. Anyone who knows the history behind the Iron Curtain immediately recognizes the pattern. All this was a grim reality for Poland and Lithuania, East Germany and Romania, and others. Mass deportations, the brutal rule of the secret police, deprivation of property and civil rights. But it never became a real stigma for the USSR and later Russia. It never became something of which a nation is ashamed, something that demands justice and punishment, acknowledgement and atonement. And this is where we are now. The occupier is back. And the occupier wages the war exactly like the Soviets did. Here, I have another story to share. It is as important as an exemplary case as a personal confession and admission of responsibility. My step-grandfather was a soldier in the Soviet army that invaded Finland in 1939. My mother witnessed him talking about his deeds. She had memorized one particular story of his, told in a low and dispassionate voice. He talked about the granite hill on which there was a small concrete pillbox, strategically very well placed. Deep swamps to the left and to the right, unfrozen despite the harsh cold, gave Soviets no place for maneuver. A Finnish machine gun crew inside the pillbox repelled several infantry attacks. The Soviets retreated, leaving dead and wounded on the icy and slippery slope. Their commander requested support. After a while, a Soviet tank appeared. It tried to drive up to the hill for the direct shot, but its caterpillar slipped on the icy granite. It was stuck halfway up. A Soviet infantry sergeant, former lumberjack, ordered his sprawled men to find some timber and put it under the caterpillars. But the machine gun was firing at every move, and there was nothing on the slope but the tank and the soldiers, alive and dead. Those killed in yesterday's attacks were already frozen and hard as timber. So the sergeant ordered to use them as timber, to collect those fallen and tuck them under the caterpillars of the both sides of the tank, so it could finally move forward. After a short moment of hesitation, the soldiers obeyed. The tank went uphill, grinding the bodies of the dead into mush, and delivered a deadly shot. After retelling this part, my mother added, "He insisted the worst thing he remembers from war is that sound, very specific sound of the bodies cracking under the weight of tank. He heard it everywhere." It may seem that I'm trying to humanize the Soviet aggressors, to present their side. No, I'm not. Instead, I would like to draw your attention to one specific trait of the Russian or the Soviet Empire. This trait was already mentioned here today: the extremely low value of human life. This is not just an internal problem. In international relations, a low value of life is an indispensable currency of aggression, a natural resource of sorts, the raw material of war. For an aggressor can buy, which nothing else can buy: time. Putin's army is an army of yesterday, and exactly this is its gruesome advantage. It can sustain losses that would be absolutely unacceptable for any Western country. But it also technologically advanced enough to counter Western military technologies. Western science was first to dronize warfare, to minimize the involvement of troops on the ground, and to use machines for the new tasks. Putin's army, while also using real drones, dronizes the human beings as well. It has turned soldiers into dispensable, single-use units, exactly the way the Soviets waged the war in the 20th century. With Russia's full-scale invasion, we also entered the era of the global moral climate change. It is another very real, but not yet fully recognized, outcome of the war. Perhaps the most wide-ranging of all outcomes. With thousands of troops sent into battle, Putin doesn't just get some pieces of Ukrainian territory. He erodes the political landscape worldwide, upsets alliances, exhausts the patience of the voters in NATO countries, and drags us down to the hell of the moral relativism. What can be done about it? The old concept of politics of memory, related to the events of the 20th century and based on the minimization of the Soviet-Russian responsibility for the occupation of the large part of Europe has already expired. At the latest, it did so in 2014, after the illegal annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Donbass. Western and Southwestern Europe, which never faced the reality of the Soviet occupation, must now hear the voice of those who experienced it firsthand. With this war comes an offer to make a deal with the devil, to sacrifice others to save yourself. As a KGB operative trained to break people, Putin knows that the road to complete surrender and moral failure begins with a small concession, a small betrayal of one's principles. Yes, the European Union was not built for war. It is easy for an aggressor to take advantage of the European Union internal imbalances and contradictions, of the fact that the bloody history of long Russian occupations was not fully integrated into common historical narrative. And it is hard to say whether it will be possible to hold Russia accountable for its crimes against Ukraine anytime soon. But to build a future at all, a real future, it will be paramount to develop a cultural and historical concept countering Russia's attempt to divide and rule. In doing so, August 23rd offers itself as a starting point. At the proposal of Václav Havel, Joachim Gauck, and other prominent former dissidents, August 23rd, the day when the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed, has been established as the European Union Day of Remembrance for the victims of the Stalinism and Nazism, or the Black Ribbon Day. The significance of that day could and should be drastically increased, and its meaning substantially deepened to include the broader perspective on Russian imperialism, which was the part of the Soviet communist policy, but has outlived it. We need to make this day the focus of a long-term, uncoordinated politics of remembrance, to strengthen existing institutions like the European Network of Remembrance and Solidarity, which includes mostly Eastern European countries. We must also build new ones, cross-continentally, that are able to carry the message to the South and the West, countering both left-wing and right-wing narrative that continue to make excuses for Russia. Furthermore, the whole attitude of the EU towards the Russian opposition should be defined by the latter's acceptance of the 23rd August as a day of mourning and atonement, by its willingness to break radically with the Soviet myth of European liberation, and to accept the grievances and recriminations of those Eastern European nations which are now hosting exiled Russians. The USSR collapsed because its artificial unity was enforced by violence and oppression. The European Union endurance depends on the persistence of its voluntary unity. But the unity is not given. It is a product of mutual knowledge and compassion and many cultural bridges connecting people. It is time to start building.
Thank you, Sergei. I will symmetrically not ask questions about your speech, because I think there's not much to add. I will ask about your writing, because the building of bridges, the building of understanding, is what you have urged us to do. But formulating narratives and writing is what you do. Your latest novel, The Lady of the Mine, in this novel you go to Donbass. Will you tell us a little bit about the starting point? What drove you to Donbass? It's a short talk, but what did you find there in terms of, when we're thinking about the narrative of the past being something that we should bring with us into the understanding the challenges of the future?
in a very short form, I was trying to find an answer for the question how Russia, who always pretended and insisted that it is a stronghold of anti-fascism and anti-Nazism, ended up to be actually a fascist state. How this change of color happened. And all of a sudden, investigating the story of the flight MH17, which was shot down in the skies over the Donbass.
The Malaysian
Boeing, which was shot down by the Russian missile launcher. I found also the history beneath the layer, beneath the surface. Because Donbass actually is the eastern border of the Holocaust in Europe. It's not the Babin Yar in Kiev. It's the Donbass coal mines, which were used as a dumping sites for the bodies. And it's very eerie and a strange place, because when the Soviets came in 1944, I suppose, 43, they unsealed the mines, exhumed several bodies, and sealed the mines back with the concrete. Meaning, effectively, that for years, Soviets were covering for the Nazis, their bitter enemies, keeping this crime from being exposed. So I took this place. I mean, in mythology, you always need an axis for the werewolf to turn.
But it's a very vertical construction. It's the bodies falling from the sky onto the bodies that are the bodies of Jews that are pressed into the mine shaft. And what in this narrative are we bringing with us? What kind of understanding does this give us? I'm tough with you now.
Yeah. The understanding is that when the world looked on Donbass in 2014, it was a very shallow view of, industrial region with the, specific industrial identity. While, in a way, it was the place with the paramount record of violence. And there are no place without the history. There are no place without the special fate. And in my opinion, in my perspective, this Boeing was the signal to the world, which was not really looking there, that once this war will touch everyone, because the flight and the liner symbolized this, the unity of the world. But the signal was not well received.
Sergei, I would like to invite you to take a seat and Rosa to come up stage for our final short discussion. Please, in the middle, Sergei.
Yeah.
Rosa, one of your widely read novels that also became a film deals with a compartment in a train and a Finnish person traveling with a Russian person. And it's very much, it's praised and it's appreciated for its ability to listen to how these characters talk and interact with each other. And what Sergei has been speaking about is in a way also a sort of iron curtain of narrative that doesn't go where the other iron curtain went, but goes between Russia and all the countries that experienced its aggression during and after World War II. And that we tell the stories differently. And you have been traveling quite a lot. We have traveled in Russia, you and me, from Krasnoyarsk to Novosibirsk. Have you heard this difference? And with your special experience also of the Tornio Valley, what difference have you been hearing?
this is a very large question, but I have been living in United States, in Sweden, in Denmark, and also in Soviet Union. And I have learned that in every country, people are the same. We are the same. And of course, there are some cultural differences, but anyway, we have to remember that we are all Homo sapiens and we all are animals also. And so Finnish people are animals and Russian people are animals. And we try to in that novel, we try to make discussion, to know each other. And I have never, I was full of fear when I first time traveled to Murmansk when I was 15 years old. Because my parents thought that when I traveled there, so I never come back, and I was put in the labor camp in Siberia. And that was reality, not like a joke. But I went there, and I was 1 week in Murmansk, and I decided to learn Russian because my journey was fantastic. And after that, I have been traveling, and I'm not afraid of Russian people. I have to say that I love to travel. Of course, I'm tourist. I love to travel. I have a lot of Russian friends, and I lived there during the Brezhnev time. I have traveled during the Putin time. But this regime has nothing to do with those people. I can't tuomita. What is tuomita? Judge, yeah. I can't just Russian people because they have that kind of regime. And I can't just Americans because they have this kind of regime just now.
But I mean, if you encounter these differences of narrative, I was saying, I mean, Finland has one, you have grown up with one narrative, and the fear of your parents does not come from nowhere. How did you handle this? Is there any way to handle this difference in how we perceive the 20th century?
Yeah. I have studied all my life history, world history, Russian history, Finnish history, and I think that we can deal with these things when we have knowledge, and we have to have heart also, and we have to try to understand. And I believe in diplomacy, I believe in discussion, I don't believe in arms, because I think that we can't name anything with it which has been good with wars. But we can name a lot of things which have been developed during the peacetime. Now we have had long peacetime, 80 years peace. And when Finland was 100 years part of Russia, there was no wars in Finland. So we have to remember that peacetime is great time to develop our planet and the balance that we need with nature. So different stories, different narratives, but we can study these and get more information. Okay?
But I mean, you say, yes, I mean, when Finland was the Grand Duchy within the Russian Empire, it had its laws, it had its semi-independence. The occupied territories of Ukraine, they are not given anything. They are uprooted. So
I'm against war. I'm against liberating the territories. I'm against arms. But I want to say this. I only said this that we didn't have any war during that 100 years when we were part of Russia, because usually we name 160 terrible things what happened during that 100 years part of Russia. But in fact, there was a lot of development in Finland. And Charles also put a lot of money to develop Helsinki, Finnish society. We got university and so on. So we very easily forget the good things and we take only the bad things. But this is not that I appreciate innovations, not at all.
Sergei, you grew up in the Soviet Union as a child with the narrative that you just described, the narrative of liberation. When did you encounter another narrative? When did you realize that there is another truth outside?
It would be easy to say when the transformative moment came.
Yeah.
It also, the writer's story, it was at the island of Gotland in Sweden, in the Baltic Center for Writers and Translators, late November 2013, when the Maidan was already gaining momentum in Ukraine. There were 11 authors there representing the countries of the Baltic region, some Eastern European countries. We had the evening with wine. And all of a sudden, because of the fireplace, because of remoteness, people started to share their family stories. And it was sort of a mediation for me, because I realized that everyone's life in this room, the family life, the biography of the family, was actually just crushed by the Soviet Union. Crushed by the same Soviet soldiers whom I, by my education, by my family loyalty, maybe not exactly thought to be the liberators, but with whom I had certain closeness, at least. And it was the powerful moment of collective transformation, because they were not pressing me. They were not accusing me. They were just sharing stories, and the writers can do. But this was and since then I never was able to see, people coming in the Russian cities in this immortal regiment of things, picking up the portraits of their grandfathers. I always had the feeling that I also see them by the eyes of people of Lithuania or the people of Poland. And this was the moment of absolute change.
If I may, from my own side, when I worked in Russia 15 to 20, I was a Swedish diplomat representing Swedish culture and society, but my maternal grandparents are from Lithuania. My mother grew up in what became Poland, in Wrocław. And when I was, and of course I never talked about this because it wasn't my role, but with some Russian friends. At some point when the Immortal Brigade was marching and the 9th of May, when they dressed their children, 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds, as Red Army soldiers, as Chekists, proud that their children will remember their grandfather's great liberation of Europe. I said when I was visiting my grandparents when they were removed from Lithuania to what was former German territory, and they lived there, I always said that in my childhood, sometimes you would see women with the eyes poked out. But the grown-ups would never tell me why. And I remember an older cousin telling me when I was 14, 15, that, the Red Army was allowed to rape German women, as many as they wanted, how they wanted. But Polish women, they were supposed to be the future socialist brother nation, so you couldn't rape them. So you would put out the eyes of one woman and then gang rape her, the whole regiment. And it was then, and when I said, when you're carrying these people like saints, it's not that we cannot talk. Let's sit down and talk. We all are humans, like you're saying, Rosa. We can talk about the suffering that I was traded, the suffering you were traded. But if you make these people into saints, some of them raped these women. And the Russians would cover their ears because they couldn't take this in, because they are the liberators. They're the source of moral power. And claiming that they were mass raping women, looting civilians, all of this, it's just impossible.
Let me just add something, because what we really need, we need the balance in sharing, because I do understand that maybe 100 years being part of the Russian Empire could be perceived as a sort of a golden age. But empire was big in this 100 years. And what happened in the other end of empire was the brutal conquest of Caucasus, with the real genocides, several genocides coming, genocides of Cherkessians, for example, with the scorched earth policy of the Russian troops, wiping out village by village by village. And this is the same empire, and this is the same emperors doing so. And the problem is that as a Russian, I would gladly hear you saying this was the golden age.
Not golden age, but there were good.
There was something good there.
Yeah, something good.
Let's agree on that. And I will be deaf and not willing to listen to the Chechens, for whom this same period was the period of long-lasting suffering. And the question is how we bring this together.
Yeah.
How we bring this together.
And I think this is the question we must leave everyone with. And if I may express a gratitude to the organizers, it's the gratitude that I was given the task to moderate two very different angles, two different voices that are leaving us with no answers. They are leaving us with this enormous task of bringing the 20th century together so that we can do something good with the 21st. And the 20th century is there to deal with. We need to deal with it and bring it with us into the 21st. And with this, I would like to thank Rosa Liksom and Sergei Lebedev for sharing this with us, and I would like to give them a big round of applause. And now I have a very practical information. Food is waiting for us outside. Thank you, everyone that participated in these days. Thank you to the organizers, and thank you once again, Rosa and Sergei.
Can I read your speech on the internet? Can I? Yes, because thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Janina.